Hi again, everyone. Gary Digital Williams here on Beltway Boxing News and Notes on the Boxing on the Beltway Podcast Network. And of course, the podcast network can always be heard on Stitcher, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, Podcast Addict. We're also on Google Podcasts, and we're also on Spotify. So you can hear the Boxing on the Beltway podcast wherever you can go, because we have archived news and information, live broadcasts. You can hear it anytime for free on the Boxing on the Beltway Podcast Network. And of course, continuing with the quarantine with the coronavirus. Again, hope you all are staying safe, washing your hands, and keeping that social distance. And so we've been doing a lot of tributes to boxers who have been very, very influential in the past. We're going to do one again this week with one of our four Kings of Beltway Boxing. And I think the King of Beltway Boxing that may get talked about the least out of the four. You know, Mark Too Sharp Johnson was a Hall of Famer and one of the greatest boxers ever, obviously, because he was a International Boxing Hall of Famer. William Joppy, a tremendous title holder, three-time world champion, fought the likes of Roberto Duran. Shambe Mitchell was always a very popular fan favorite here in the Beltway Boxing. But the one we're going to talk about this week, Keith Holmes, I don't think gets the due sometimes that he deserves. He was an outstanding boxer, one of the great boxers to watch in the Beltway during the boxing spotlight era especially, and definitely one of the classiest guys I've ever had the pleasure of meeting. This week we're going to talk about the legendary Keith Holmes here on the Boxing on Beltway Podcast Network. Beltway Boxing News and Notes on the Boxing on Beltway Podcast Network, brought to you by Real-Time Pain Relief. From boxers to ballerinas, for shoulder pain and muscle strain, everything in between, Boxing on the Beltway recommends Real-Time Pain Relief, the natural, plant-based, safe, fast, and effective ointment. You go to freepainoffer.com, buy $10 worth of Real-Time Pain Relief. You get a free $10 tube of Real-Time Pain Relief, the official pain relief of the 2020 Daytona 500. Rub it on, the pain is gone in real time. And by DeborahSpears.com. She has great weight loss tips, great jewelry, and great training methods at Deborah, that's Debra Spears.com. Well, Keith Holmes, we said, one of the more underrated world champions that we've ever had in the Beltway, I think, anyway. He is one of the four kings. And the reason why I called them the four kings, Mark Johnson, Shambe Mitchell, William Joppy, and Keith Holmes, because at one time, they all held the world title. They held world championships, because Mark was, at that time, a super flyweight champion. Shambe Mitchell was the junior welterweight champion, super lightweight champion, and Joppy and Holmes both held one part of the middleweight championship. William Joppy was the WBA middleweight champion, and Holmes held the WBC title. So that's why I called them the four kings. Now, Keith Holmes' career, again, a very, very solid career as a whole. Overall, he had a record. I'm going to starting with the records first. 41-5 with 25 KOs. He had an outstanding record. His career started on October 26, 1989, winning a 4-round unanimous decision over Kilpatrick Mitchell in Atlantic City, New Jersey. And he would progress throughout the local Beltway boxing scene. He fought at the Teamsters Hall in Baltimore. In November 89, scored his first TKO over Roland Jones then. He would fight at the Blue Horizon, Philadelphia, the National Guard Army in Philadelphia, come back to the Baltimore Teamster Hall, fought his first bout in Washington, D.C. at the Frank Williams Activity Center at Coolidge Senior High School in D.C., won a 6-round unanimous decision over Anthony Ross. Now, he went up to 6 rounds pretty quickly after going to his first 4 bouts as in the 4-rounders. He went up to 6-round bouts really in May of 1990, defeating Anthony Green by a 6-round split decision. Now, again, he would be undefeated, progressing throughout his career. Now, when I got a chance to see Keith Holmes for the very first time, it was at a card at the ABC Auditorium in Annandale, Virginia. This is a different place from the ABC Sports Complex, the Alexander Boxing Club Sports Complex that's in Springfield, Virginia. This ABC Auditorium was a bingo hall, basically. It was a bingo hall. And it was converted into a boxing ring. The ceiling was very low, so it was very hard for us to videotape a lot of the bouts there during that time because the ceiling was very low. And during that time, Keith Holmes was being managed and trained by 2 guys out of Virginia who I became very good friends with eventually, but it got off to a rocky start a little bit. They were Wade and Walt Keel, and they had a boxing club called Satellite Boxing Club. And they were very nice guys. Don't get me wrong, they're very nice guys, but I think they were very suspicious of what Boxing Spotlight was trying to do at that time. We were trying to, as we say, highlight and spotlight the area, the Beltway's greatest prospects and challengers. And at that time, Keith Holmes was definitely in that mix. So I think we videotaped the Jeff Johnson bout, and Wade and Walt Key wanted to know what we were going to do with the footage. I thought we want to show them on TV. Now, we never made a dime from Boxing Spotlight. This was truly a labor of love that we did. I don't know, I mentioned that a couple weeks ago when I did the tribute to Boxing Spotlight. But this was truly a labor of love for us. And it was a major experience. And Keith Holmes was one of those prospects that we couldn't touch because Wade and Walt Key were trying to ban us from getting ready to show his boxers. So on January 27, 1994, Keith Holmes beat Jeff Johnson. This is the same Jeff Johnson that would later lose an IBC middleweight championship to Gary Rock Payne. We talked about that on the tribute to the night Leon Spinks came to town. So Jeff Johnson would lose to Keith Holmes by 12-round unanimous decision. I don't know. This must have been for a I think it was on USBA Southern Division middleweight champion, welterweight champion. He was welterweight at that time, welterweight champion at that time. And Keith Holmes regressed. And finally, on April 8th, 1994, we've got our first look at Keith Holmes on Boxing Spotlight for a guy named Luis Castillo at the Showplace Arena up in Marlboro, Maryland. Now, the promoters at that time, what I believe was Sunrise Promotions, Herman Amos and Spurgeon Montgomery, they allowed us to come and videotape the show. And we had an opportunity to videotape the entire show, show it on the camera, and we showed Keith Holmes fighting Luis Castillo. Now, once Wade and Walt found out that we were not trying to make any money off their fighter, they had no problem with us videotaping their bouts. And that would lead to a very, 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 very nice friendship between myself personally and the Keel brothers. I know Keel brothers would call me when I was working at Pepco at the time, and they would call me almost religiously after we got squared away and talk about their fighter and so forth. So it became a very good relationship. So on April 8th, 1994, the Showplace Arena up in Marlboro, Maryland, Holmes would win a second-round knockout over Luis Castillo. The very next bout was probably his biggest bout to date at that time. That was on May 11th, 1994, and Holmes would take on a former Olympian by the name of Kelsey Banks. And he would dominate Kelsey Banks, scoring a third-round TKO at the ABC Auditorium in Annandale, Virginia. Once again, we could not videotape a full show there because the ceiling was so low, we could not put our cameras and our equipment in there. But Kelsey Banks would, Keith Holmes would beat Kelsey Banks by a third-round TKO. After a July 20th, 1994 bout against Eric Reinhardt in Raleigh, North Carolina, which Holmes would score a second-round TKO, he would come back to D.C., and this was one of our first marquee bouts on Boxing Spotlight, after maybe Daryl Coley and Sal Mambi. This bout was a marquee bout because it definitely was a youth versus experience bout, a passing of the torch, you might say. Now, at that time, Keith Holmes had moved up to the junior middleweight level. And on August 18th, 1994, Keith Holmes would take on a veteran, to say the very least, by the name of Daryl Lattimore, Dangerous D. Daryl Lattimore. And that was at the Washington Convention Center, the old Convention Center. And it was a great, great performance for Keith Holmes. He was magnificent in this bout. And he would knock out Daryl Lattimore in the third round and win that bout quite handily. Now, that would set him up for become one of his biggest title bouts, a USBA Super Welterweight title bout between himself, Keith Holmes, and another local prospect by the name of Andrew Council. Now, there's a major story behind this particular bout. In fact, there are a couple major stories behind this bout. Number one, the bout was scheduled to be covered by ESPN. It was on ESPN Boxing that night, from the Showplace Arena up in Marlboro, Maryland. And actually, Holmes and Council weren't even supposed to be on TV that night. The main event was scheduled to be a boxer by the name of Dana Rosenblatt. And Dana Rosenblatt was out of Massachusetts, out of the Boston area. And I remember a good friend of mine, a guy I went to college with at Howard University by the name of Joe Burris, was covering sports for the Boston Globe. And at that time. And he was coming down to Upper Marlboro to see this bout and to see Dana Rosenblatt. Now, about 3 days before that event, and I couldn't get the joke, I didn't have his phone number, Dana Rosenblatt was ill and got taken off the card. And that elevated the Andrew Council and Keith Holmes bout to what turned out to be main event status that night. I believe there was another bout that was scheduled to be a co-feature, but that got scrapped as well. So Council Holmes became the main event bout. And I had to be the one to tell Joe, right at the bout, right that night, that Dana Rosenblatt was off the card. Now, that week was very big for us on Boxing Spotlight because this bout on September 23rd, 1994 took place about 3 days after the main bout between Daryl Tyson and Reggie Showtime Green, and also Daryl Coley and Rocky Balboa, that took place at the DC Armory, that was on USA Tuesday Night Fights the very same week. So USA came on Tuesday, and ESPN came in, I believe it was either on a Thursday or on a Friday. I think it was on Thursday, actually. It was Thursday night. Yeah, so that was that night. Now, the biggest story over all of this was the week of that particular bout, the bout between Holmes and Council on September 23rd, 1994, at the Showplace Arena. Keith Holmes was arrested and he was charged with murder, first-degree murder, that week. And I'm not exactly sure how he was able to fight the fight in the first place, except he probably was released on his own recognizance. Because the details around the situation were kind of shaky. And as it turned out, he would be acquitted. But that was a bizarre week because, again, he was literally had been arrested, then let go, was able to fight the fight, and then went back into custody after the bout was over. We'll get to that in a second. Get a little bit to that in a second. Now, this bout was for the USBA Super Welterweight Championship. And Andrew Council fought extremely well, one of the best fights he's had in his whole career at that time. And only one thing that kept Andrew Council from possibly winning that bout is that referee Chris Wallinson, the referee at that time, took 3 points away from Andrew Council for low blows. And when it was all said and done, the scores on the bout, Joseph Cooper scored the bout 117-108. He had it well ahead for Keith Holmes. Bieber Exton had 114-111 for Holmes. And Vaughn LaPrade had about 115-113, I believe it was, for Holmes. It was a 12-round bout for the USBA Super Welterweight title. And Keith Holmes would win that title. Again, I thought Andrew Council really got robbed as far as the low blows were concerned, because he was a fierce body puncher, always had been, and many of those body shots I thought were right on the belt line, and even a little above the belt line. And it turns out Maryland may have thought the same way, because I don't think Chris Wallinson ever, ever did another bout in Maryland again after that was over. Excuse me. I don't think he ever did a bout again in Maryland. He's very famous in Virginia, but I don't think he ever worked in Maryland again after that bout. So Keith Holmes remained undefeated, and then right after that bout, he went to jail. And of course, a few months later, he was acquitted. But it was so interesting because I did the interview with Keith and his trainer at that time, Cleveland Burgess. By this time, Wade and Walt Keel were no longer in the picture. I don't know exactly what happened to them, but Wade and Walt Keel were no longer in the picture by the time he fought Andrew Council. In fact, I think it might have happened right before he fought Andrew Council. I do remember the Keel brothers calling me at work and complaining about how Keith Holmes basically dissed them, so to speak. And so so that was interesting there. So he was not with Wade and Walt at that time. He would go on. He'd score a second round knockout. By that time, again, he had been acquitted, so he was able to resume his boxing career, and he did so on March 20th, 1995, scored a second-round knockout over Sam Wilson in Louisville, Kentucky. He stayed in Louisville, scored a first-round knockout over Kenneth Kidd on April 10th, 1995. On August 19th, at the MGM Grand Hotel in Las Vegas, he would score a fourth-round TKO over Tommy Small. In a really nice setup bout for him took place on December 16th, 1995, when he would win a six-round unanimous decision over Kevin Tillman in Philadelphia. That was Kevin Tillman's hometown. Kevin Tillman was a boxer that was really gave a lot of Beltway boxers fits. Matter of fact, he took on Lloyd Jabba Bryan either before, it might have been before that, and he thought he won the bout here at Martin's Crossroads in Greenbelt, Maryland, but he lost the bout by, I believe it was either majority or split decision. I have to look back on that again and talk about that one. But, yeah, it was a tough fight. He was a tough fight, no question now about that. And that set Keith Holmes up for his biggest shot ever, and that was a shot at the WBC Middleweight Championship against Quincy Taylor on March 16th, 1996 at the MGM Grand Hotel in Las Vegas, Nevada. Now, a couple stories around this bout. First of all, the card that this was on, this was a Don King Promotions card. I think Keith Holmes by that time was a Don King fighter, or was going to be one, either way. And this card was absolutely loaded. It was on pay-per-view, and the main event of the card was Mike Tyson, I believe, either defending or winning the WBC Heavyweight Championship against Frank Bruno. Also on this card, there were no less on this card than, let's see, I'm going to count this real quick. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Hall of Famers on this card. All right. Mike Tyson against Frank Bruno. Michael Carbajal would win the vacant IBF light flyweight title in a 12-round unanimous decision over Melchor Cobb Castro. Bernard Hopkins would defend the IBF middleweight championship against Joe Lipsy, win by fourth round knockout. Ricardo Lopez, one of the greatest boxers of all time, one of my all-time favorites, would defend the WBC minimum weight title with an 8-round KO over Ala Villamor. Also, Miguel Angel Gonzalez was on this card, former world WBC champion, lightweight champion, I believe he was. He won an 8-round unanimous decision over Ramon Marchena. And Christy Martin would win a 6-round unanimous decision over Deidre Gogarty on this card. So the Hall of Famers abounding on that card. Now, I remember watching this card at my partner Jerome's Fight Dr. Spears' house. And he would always have fight parties, and he would ask everybody to put down their predictions on who they thought would win the bout. Now, on this particular pay-per-view, although Keith Holmes' fight took place before Mike Tyson's bout, they ended up showing it afterwards. The last bout they'd show on that pay-per-view. So after Mike Tyson fought Frank Bruno, a lot of folks that were at the party with me that night at Jerome's house started to leave. But I sat right in front of the TV because that was about I wanted to see. Keith Holmes taking on Quincy Taylor. And boy, what a great bout it was. It was really an excellent bout that Holmes would win by 9th round TKO over Quincy Taylor to win the WBC Middleweight Championship. He would win that bout. That was his first world title. Tremendous bout. He was in great shape, and he would go on to win that bout relatively easily. All right. And that was on March 16th, 1996. Holmes would defend the title for the first time in a card I've talked about before. It was the Middleweight Mayhem card. Took place at the Showplace Arena up in Marlboro, Maryland. It was televised by Showtime. And it was on October 19th, 1996. And both Holmes and William Joppy would defend their titles that night with the hope that the two would meet each other down the road. And Holmes would have a relatively tough bout against Richie Woodhall out of England. He'd win a 12th round TKO, but it was a tough bout for him. Holmes was winning on the scorecards. By the way, the referee for that was the late, great Arthur McCanny Sr. And he would win that bout and look very good in winning that contest. No question about that. William Joppy win his bout by, I believe it was 4th round TKO. And unfortunately, I've talked about this. I did a whole podcast devoted to this. They never would fight for the unified middleweight championship. So that was probably the biggest thing that Beltway boxing has ever missed on. Not being able to get Holmes and Joppy to fight each other. So Holmes' first title defense was successful, and he would defend the WBC middleweight championship against Richie Woodhall. Then on December 5th, 1997, so he's almost a year away, Holmes would defend his WBC title against Paul Vaden, the former IBF junior middleweight champion. In fact, he beat Vincent Petway for that title. And Holmes would win an 11th round TKO in that contest. Vaden had moved up to middleweight. In fact, he was on the middleweight mayhem card, on that card, and won about there, and he would end up losing to Holmes on that card. Then on May 2nd, 1998, I don't know what happened here, but this was a terrible, terrible event for Keith Holmes. He would travel to Villeurbanne, France, and he would defend his WBC middleweight championship against Hassan Sharifi out of France. And for some reason, again, he was under newer management and trainers and so forth. And unfortunately, Holmes did not go over to France until about 2 weeks before the card was able to begin. And he couldn't get adjusted to the time difference. He couldn't get adjusted to the atmosphere in France. And he had a very lethargic performance. And despite his lethargic performance, he was able to knock down Sharif in the 9th round. However, he had not done enough early in the bout to get the decision. And Hassan Sharif would win a 12-round unanimous decision and win the WBC middleweight title over Keith Holmes. John Keane, the judge, had a 115-112. Also, Ray Solas had a 115-112. Chris Stroh had a 115-113, all for Hassan Sharif. And he deserved it. Holmes did not fight well in that bout, despite the knockdown. He did not fight well that night, and he lost the title. Then on November 13, 1998, Holmes would bounce back. He'd win a 10-round shutout unanimous decision over Urbano Girola, and that was at the Hilton Hotel in Las Vegas. He would return to the Washington Convention Center, and he would win a first-round TKO bout over Alex Lubel on February 6, 1999, and that would set him up for the rematch against Hassan Sharifi at what was then known as the MCI Center, now known as Capital One Arena in Washington, D.C., as part of the Triple Jeopardy card. I've talked about the Triple Jeopardy card during his anniversary. That was the card that featured Shambe Mitchell taking on Reggie Green, Mark Johnson taking on Ratnai Sorovorpin, and Keith Holmes would go after Hassan Sharifi for try to get back his WBC middleweight championship, and he would do that against Sharifi, scoring a 7th round TKO in that bout. Again, the whole concept of Triple Jeopardy was the open scoring. Open scoring had actually in that bout, one judge, Franz Marti, at the time of the stoppage, had Sharifi ahead 58-56. But the other two judges, Terry O'Connor and Masakazu Uchida, had about 58-56 for Holmes. But didn't matter because Holmes did win by 7th round TKO. And I remember Sharif was not very happy with that decision. Exactly 5 months later to the day, September 24th, 1999, exactly 5 months later, I should say, Holmes would defend his title, WBC middleweight title, against his old nemesis, Andrew Council. And this was a card that actually I did attend this card. I was not at this card. I did see it on Showtime, but as was by the way, the card that featured Triple J was also on Showtime. This card, I believe, was on Showtime as well. And this time, it was a little easier win for Keith Holmes. He would win by 12-round unanimous decision, knock Council down in the 9th round, and win the bout by unanimous decision to defend his WBC middleweight championship. Then on April 29th, 2000, Holmes would defend his title against Robert McCracken in Wembley Arena in Wembley, England. And I think he learned a lesson from the Sharifi bout, and he would be a little bit better prepared, and he would win a 11th round TKO over Robert McCracken, who was undefeated at the time, and win and continue holding his WBC middleweight title. And McCracken was stopped with a cut right below his left eyebrow to stop the bout. Now, that would set up not only Keith Holmes, but also William Joppy for something that Don King thought about called the Middleweight Championship Series. Now, before we get to the actual bout that Keith was in, I got to talk about some of the events leading up to it, including the press conference that took place at Crampton Auditorium on the campus of Howard University for the Middleweight Championship bout, Championship Series. The Championship Series not only had the WBC champion Keith Holmes, WBA champion William Joppy, also had the IBF champion Bernard Hopkins, and the guy that was moving up to welterweight, the former IBF welterweight champion, moving up to middleweight, the former IBF welterweight champion by the name of Felix Tito Trinidad. And Trinidad did not make the press conference, but Joppy, Holmes, and Hopkins were all there. And sitting in the audience, in the auditorium, and seeing Keith Holmes and William Joppy at the level where they were at that time, the pride that came over my body was just amazing. I was so thrilled to see them there, because this was at that time as big as you could get. I don't think anybody else before that had ever reached the levels that both Hopkins and Joppy reached at that time. Mark Johnson won his world title, and that was a great event. Sean Mitchell won his title. That was a great event. But to see both Joppy and Holmes at that level, after following their careers pretty much almost from the beginning, was a sense of pride that I will always remember. And I remember talking to both of them and just saying how proud I was of them, and they recognized that I'd seen them since the beginning of their career, and it was a tremendous event. Just to see them up there and see them talking to the press and highlighting what was outstanding, actually, series. Unfortunately, though, this is probably Keith Holmes' worst performance, in all honesty. I hate to say that, but I think it's true. He just did not fight well against Hopkins. Hopkins gave him a boxing lesson that night. It was April 14, 2001 at Madison Square Garden, New York City. It was on HBO. And it just was a terrible performance for Keith. There's just no way to go around it. It was just a horrible performance. Easy 12-round unanimous decision for Bernard Hopkins. One judge George Colon had a 118-109. Larry Hazard Jr. had a 117-110. And I believe Tommy Kazmarek had a 119-108. And it was just that bad. It was that bad of a performance. No question about it. It was that bad of a performance for Keith Holmes. And so Hopkins would walk off with the WBC and the IBF middleweight championship. Now, Keith Holmes never won another title. He would go on and get some good wins. He would bounce back off the Hopkins loss and beat Anthony Ivory by unanimous decision on September 8, 2003 at the Washington Convention Center. He would beat Jason Papillon in Las Vegas on October 4th, 2003. Scored an 8th round knockdown in that bout and went on to win the bout by 8th round TKO. He would go on and lose an IBF light middleweight title eliminator by majority decision to Roman Karamazin on April 2nd, 2005. He would beat Corey Cummings out of Baltimore in a bout that took place at the Allstate Arena, in Rosemont, Illinois. I think it was formerly the Rosemont Horizon. This was on October 7, 2006. He beat Corey Cummings by a 10-round unanimous decision. His last shot at a title was for the WBA Fedelatin light heavyweight title against Tito Mendoza on August 16, 2007. He would lose an 8-round unanimous decision in that bout. And his final bout was at light heavyweight. He would beat Willis Lockett, another boxer from this area, at the Washington Convention Center on June 6, 2009. and win an 8-round unanimous decision. And his career would end, once again, his final record, Keith Holmes' final record, 41-5 with 25 knockouts. Since this time, since his boxing days, Keith Holmes has been an entrepreneur extraordinaire. I remember around the latter part of his career, he did a nice music video. I can't remember the name of it, unfortunately, though, but he did a nice music video. It looked like he was trying to forge another career as a rapper. But he's now been an entrepreneur. He sells vegan products. He's a vegan himself, and he sells vegan products on his Facebook page, Keith Holmes World Champion was the name of his Facebook page. And he's gone on to have a very, very good life. He's really done well for himself. Always great to see him at the cards. One of the nicest people I've met. And again, one of the classiest boxers we've ever had here in the Beltway. And there was always that talk about whether Keith Holmes and William Joppa would ever get into the ring again. Well, get in the ring, I should say. And nothing ever came of it, unfortunately. And again, I think it was the biggest mistake that Beltway boxing has ever made, was not getting those two in the ring. What a great bout that would have been. But Keith Holmes was definitely one of our 4 Kings of Beltway boxing, and he was truly an outstanding boxer, and is truly an outstanding man. So that's my tribute to 2-time WBC middleweight champion Keith Holmes, who forged a wonderful career in Beltway boxing. Beltway boxing news and notes on the Boxing on Beltway Podcast Network, brought to you by Real Time Pain Relief. Go to freepainoffer.com, buy $10 worth of Real Time Pain Relief. You get a free $10 tube of Real Time Pain Relief, the official pain relief of the 2020 Daytona 500. Rub it on, the pain is gone in real time. And by DeborahSpears.com, great weight loss tips, great jewelry, great training methods at Deborah, Debra Spears.com. Now, our next podcast will focus on the bout that made me a boxing fan for the rest of my life. Let me rephrase that. It's actually about the first live contest I ever saw. It was in the Beltway. Didn't have a lot of Beltway boxers on it, but it really shaped my destiny as a boxing reporter and commentator. We'll talk more about that in our next podcast. Till then, thanks for joining us. My name is Gary Digital Williams. We appreciate you listening to our tributes and hopefully get some actual action sometime soon. Thank you for joining us, and always keep supporting the best boxing in the world, the boxing along the Beltway. Thanks for listening. Take care.